Welcome to the Hope for the Journey podcast, a weekday wellness tips program presented by Dr. Denise Marie, Third Order Carmelite. Dr. Denise is a professionally qualified clinical psychologist, health and wellness professor and coach, counselor, plus medicinal herbs educator. Each Hope for the Journey podcast features a well-being key from Dr. Denise, helping you meet your self-care needs for living well. Listener discretion is advised because this and other Hope for the Journey episodes may contain discussions surrounding behavioral health problems and other actual potentially triggering topics.
Hello and good day, everyone. Welcome back to Hope for the Journey. I hope things are coming along okay for you today. My name is Dr. Denise, and on today's episode of the podcast, our topic is having vulnerable conversations, which is a relational self-care key for living well. I would like to begin with a question for you. What does it mean to be vulnerable in a dialogue with someone else? When you are being vulnerable in a conversation, you are choosing to share about your inner self, your inner world, for the purpose of a meaningful conversation, even if this conversation is an emotionally charged one. Being vulnerable in a dialogue means you're sharing your dreams, your values, your goals, your feelings, bad memories, and needs you have, without concern for how the other person will react or even view you after your sharing. Being vulnerable in conversation with someone means you are having a heart-to-heart talk, frankly, about the nitty-gritty of your personal life, in a way that you let down any protective barriers you might have. Letting be seen who you are at your core. So, what typically are the things that usually make it hard to be vulnerable in conversation? Well, perhaps it's hard to be vulnerable because it means you have a feeling of weakness or a feeling of being softer than you'd like to feel. Perhaps it's hard for you to be vulnerable because you would rather appear tough. Maybe you would like other people to think you are fully self-reliant, independent, and that you can take care of the challenges or problems you have on your own, by yourself. Maybe you're finding it hard to be vulnerable in conversation because it feels like exposure. And that means even of weaknesses that could be perceived. Maybe you get a feeling of shame or embarrassment. Perhaps the idea of another person seeing you shed tears and cry can make it hard to be vulnerable in a conversation you're having. Maybe you're one who prefers not to admit that you're at fault or that you have messed up on something. Maybe it's hard to be vulnerable in a talk with someone because it involves too much fear to share at a deeper, less than surface level. Maybe it's hard to be vulnerable because you already have a habit of denying your feelings or maybe bottling up your feelings. Maybe it's feelings of uncertainty that are standing in the way. Perhaps it's just easier to pretend that you like things the way they are when actually you do not like them. Maybe it's difficult to be vulnerable because, well, that simply feels too risky. Maybe too risky for the relationship. And maybe it is difficult to be vulnerable because you simply wish to protect yourself from hurt. You're focusing perhaps a lot on the fact that being vulnerable in talking with someone can simply bring on more pain that you're willing to deal with. Well, certainly there would be things to consider before making a decision to have a vulnerable conversation with another person. So it does make sense to do what could be called an interpersonal risk assessment. Is this other person that you have in mind sharing deeply with a loving person, an emotionally safe soul, a person who has earned the right to hear you from your heart? Well, if so, then it would be worth it, even though it can be hard, to be vulnerable in a conversation. There is real value in having a vulnerable conversation. It would be a mark of courage to do so, a sign of a relationship that has enough strength to bear what it is you have to divulge. There certainly are benefits to having vulnerable conversations. Certainly, doing so can be a real path to aid your own learning and your growth. It can help other people to understand you better. It can relieve one or more undue burdens that you have been carrying. You can experience more authentic connection that is aligned with your true self rather than any pretend or false self. Having a vulnerable conversation can help another person trust you more. Even increase your ability to handle a range of criticisms. Being vulnerable in a dialogue can enable you to experience a wider range of bonding, of connection that is deeper, allowing you to receive more love from the other person. Having vulnerable conversations can actually bring you more contentment despite the difficulties involved, advancing your sense of self-worth, helping you understand other people better in general. Having vulnerable talks is actually a means of inspiring others to change for the better. And there certainly are ways to let yourself be more vulnerable in the conversations that you have. Certainly, it would begin by being honest with yourself. Accept there may be discomfort or pain when you do share. To become more vulnerable in conversations also mean you need to have safe places to talk to the other person. You might even wish to, and it's okay, to prepare and practice the message that you want to make known in the conversation to come. And when the conversation does happen, It certainly helps to disclose at least one or more of the thoughts you've been having. How about revealing one or more true feelings or true emotions that you've been experiencing? How about talking about what has pained you, even what you have failed at accomplishing? Being more vulnerable in conversations would mean, of course, more revealing the real you to another person, who you truly are in all honesty, even admitting your mistakes, feeling free to say about something, I just don't know. I don't know. Having a more vulnerable dialogue with another person enables you to seek and receive help when you need it. Social support is something that helps you in life. Why not approach an opportunity in your relationship that would be a good match to you rather than remain stuck where you are? So you might be wondering what kinds of words would typically appear in having a vulnerable conversation with someone. Well, it can sound like the following quotes. When you said that, I felt this. Can we discuss what just happened? I know we are both upset, but I believe we can work through this and get through this. What I am hearing is that right? I regret what happened and I really am sorry. How can we move past this? What can I do to make this right? How can we ensure that this does not happen again? I understand we all make mistakes and I am willing to move forward. What do you think about this approach? In general, it is possible to have helpfully vulnerable conversations with the others in our lives, all in service of improving your relational wellness, resulting in a more satisfying life for you overall. Going forward with today's subject, I wish to point out two people who appreciate the significance of having vulnerable conversations. I would first like to highlight Natalie Grant, U.S. singer-songwriter of contemporary Christian and gospel music. Natalie was the recipient 5 times of the Gospel Music Association's Dove Award for Female Vocalist of the Year. And Natalie was also nominated for 9 Grammy Awards. Natalie Grant's answer to the question, what was the best piece of advice she'd been given in her life, went like this. In regard to walking with God, she said, quote, every stage is taking you closer to the greatest stage, end quote. And in relation to the idea of the goodness of pressing past the emotion of fear, Natalie has said, quote, lean into the nerves instead of trying to make them go away. Is a reminder that we're not built to do anything on our own strength. God values our mess, end quote. Natalie Grant also has said, quote, Nerves are not to get rid of, end quote. She has expressed her belief that nerves create an opportunity to state to oneself, quote, I'm going to do it anyway. Makes it easier every time, end quote. And now the other person I wish to bring to mind is American Christian self-help best-selling author Dr. Henry Cloud, who is also a clinical psychologist, public speaker, consultant, and longtime executive coach. Things which Dr. Cloud has said about being vulnerable in relationships are as follows. June 6, 2016, on Facebook, Dr. Cloud wrote, quote, our vulnerability is what makes our power available to others, end quote. On X.com, formerly known as Twitter, on September 26 of 2017, Dr. Henry Cloud wrote, quote, vulnerability leads to openness, leads to receiving, leads to strength. Strength comes from weakness, and weakness from feigned strength, end quote. Also on X.com, this time August 21st of the year 2022, Dr. Henry Cloud also wrote, quote, people who grow are people who jump in over their head, showing courageous vulnerability. They take on challenges that ask them to become more than they have been or done before. When the bar is raised, they jump higher, end quote. Dr. Henry Cloud has even shared his perspective that there is healing power in vulnerable friendships. So, both of these influential persons, Natalie Grant and Dr. Henry Cloud, believe that having vulnerable conversations is a relational practice for better living. Moving our focus to what comes next on our podcast today, I have a piece of music to present that especially shows what having vulnerable conversations involves. The song I am featuring for you is called To Love Is to Be Vulnerable by Maya Melodies. So I will read the words of this song, which I found on the internet. To love at all is to be laid bare, to give your heart and face the wear and tear. It's a risk we take with every beat and breath. In the joy and the pain, we find our death. They say love's a gamble, a dance with the unknown, and in its embrace, we're never alone. To love is to be vulnerable, to open up wide, to let your heart be warm, to let emotions collide. Lock it up safe and it will turn to stone. In the casket of comfort, you're left all alone. To love is to be vulnerable, to give it all away in the risk and the heartache we find our way. If you guard your heart, if you shield it from light, it'll wither in the darkness, lost to endless night, rapid luxury in hobbies and in fame. But without the touch of love, it'll never be the same. They say love's a gammy, through the light and the dark. In its trials and its triumphs, we find our spark. To love is to be vulnerable, to open up wide, to let your heart be warm, to let emotions collide. Lock it up safe and it will turn to stone. In the casket of comfort, you're left all alone. To love is to be vulnerable, to give it all away. In the risk and the heartache, we find our way. So here's to the courage, to the pain and the strife. In the heart of the storm, we find the true light. To love is to risk, to let your heart be seen. In the vulnerability, we find what it means. To love is to be vulnerable, to open up wide, to let your heart be warm, to let emotions collide. Lock it up safe and it will turn to stone in the casket of comfort. You're left all alone. To love is to be vulnerable, to give it all away. In the risk and the heartache, we find our way. So, as this song clearly explains, having vulnerable conversation grows not only one's relational wellness, but also one's full well being. For this segment, I wish to discuss some extra possible care for you and your overall wellness by indicating the following 3 health foods and plants to warm your heart for having vulnerable conversations, our relational self care key of the day. Though, please keep in mind to go over these 3 dietary items with your doctor before placing them into your health routines. I include next this trio of foods and plants as complementary to body and soul functioning. First, I make the suggestion of lemon balm. Lemon balm is an herb that is stress reducing, calming, soothing, and uplifting. Most people who use it do so as a tea of lemon balm leaves, though you can also stir it into smoothies, desserts, or yogurt. Then I can mention Panax ginseng. Panax ginseng is Asian ginseng, which helps with cardiovascular issues, increases energy level, and can increase your stamina so you feel stronger. It aids a body's balance when things get tough. Additionally, there is valerian, which promotes heart health, relieves stress and tension due to its relaxation properties. Plus, valerian contributes to concentration during the day. Just please remember my advice to review valerian and the other foods and plants I noted today with your doctor to confirm there being a good match to your specific health profile. Otherwise, I am pleased to underline lemon balm, Panax ginseng, and valerian as a few of nature's gifts for well-being of both your body and soul. Also for today, I wanted to share this brief item with you, a post-it note I have written to encourage you toward having vulnerable conversations. So I hope you will take to heart these words from a friend, actually from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8. Being affectionately desirous of someone you're close to, be ready to share not only the good news of God, but also your own self, because this other person is very dear to you. As to the next part of our today's podcast plan, I discovered an app to assist the practice of having vulnerable conversations. The name of this app is Agape, a relational wellness app for couples, friends, and family members to positively affect a relationship by encouraging 2 persons to communicate honestly and openly with each other, to advance delving deeper into understanding, shared love, values, and priorities. The Agape app was designed by a small team of 6 friends from New York, Missouri, Oregon, and North Carolina. One survey actually found that 97% of the app's users reported that Agape was positively affecting their relationships. The content description itself for this app says that it is, quote, an app designed to help users feel closer to their loved ones by asking daily questions to spark meaningful conversations, strengthen your relationship, crafted using over 20 years of relationship research, end quote. This app also features games and quizzes, plus even date ideas for couples. Further, going beyond this Agape app, I found you can bring to mind that there are other wellness helps to discover in our Hope for the Journey podcast resource center, located on Instagram at Cause for Hope. And as a finishing point, to close up this evening's talking points, I wanted you to know that it has been a pleasure to create this podcast for you today on our valuable topic of having vulnerable conversations, to underline the importance of this relational self-care key for you. And please know that I personally wish you more hope for the journey of greater well-being.
The Hope for the Journey program airs weekday evenings from 7:45 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Instagram and YouTube. Dr. Denise thanks you for listening to her Community Wellness podcast and wishes you to keep in mind that there is cause for hope of more well-being.